Sorry, I'm not sure. Oh, I see. Sorry about that. So I will start with a definition of syntactic awareness. I think it is an aspect of more metalinguistic awareness. But among different aspects of metalinguistic awareness, I think people are more familiar with phonological awareness and even morphological awareness. In comparison, syntactic awareness is less studied. So syntactic awareness refers to one's ability to reflect on and manipulate the structure of sentences. So it is both syntax and morphology are part of grammar. So in this particular study that I'm presenting, we focus on sentence order. So here's an example. The door opened. So we will give children segments of a sentence, and they have to sort these segments and present a grammatical sentence. So the correct answer here is the girl opened the door. Okay. So the study I'm presenting is about the relationship between syntactic awareness and reading comprehension. So conceptually speaking, syntactic awareness supports reading comprehension in several ways. So it helps children parse a complex sentence into smaller, more manageable chunks to facilitate comprehension. So you may have a very long sentence, say, when it rains, it's hard for me to go to school, which is far away from my home, something like that. If you do not have any awareness of syntax, it's just one very long sentence. It's difficult to understand. But if you understand, if you're aware of the sentence order and the different clauses that make up the sentence, you can chunk it into different segments, and then that will allow you to understand each segment or each chunk and then put them together. So in that sense, syntactic awareness facilitates reading comprehension. In a related vein, syntactic awareness also facilitate comprehension by reducing the demands of complex sentences on working memory. Obviously, it's very challenging to memorize one long sentence, but if you can chunk it into different pieces, and it's a bit easier to remember. And also it's hard to remember a sentence by each single word because a sentence can have, 20, 30 words. But if you can segment it into, say, 5 to 7 chunks, is much easier. Okay, and then syntactic awareness may also play a role in comprehension by allowing children to monitor their comprehension. So we call that process comprehension monitoring. So when something goes wrong in a sentence, you realize, oh, this part is not grammatical, it doesn't make sense. So let me go back and read it again. So it allows you having a sense of how the order is supposed to be, allows you to monitor your own comprehension. Okay, good. So these are just illustrations of the same points. Syntax directly supports reading comprehension. So the boy tags the girl versus the girl tags the boy. The two sentences have exactly the same words, but obviously the meanings are different depending on the syntax. Okay, and then in addition to supporting reading comprehension directly, syntactic awareness may have indirect effects on reading comprehension through word reading and vocabulary. So in other words, syntactic awareness can support word reading, which also supports reading comprehension. And then syntactic awareness may support vocabulary, which in turn facilitates reading comprehension. So I'll briefly explain these relationships. So syntactic awareness may enable children to use syntactic cues to bolster partial decoding and enable word identification. As a result, syntactic awareness may contribute to reading comprehension indirectly through word reading. So this works for young children. So young children, they haven't fully mastered decoding, so they may struggle with a word, with an unfamiliar word in reading. So they may be able to decode, say, the first letter of a word or the last letter of a word, but be kind of fuzzy about the middle. So when this happens, it's possible that syntax can help them make an informed guess about the meaning and the pronunciation of the word. So you don't know the word vacuum, so you say something like, oh, my mom bought a new vacuum cleaner today and she used it to clean the house. So you know every other word in the sentence, but you don't know the word vacuum because it's a new word, but you're able to partially decode this word. So, oh, it starts with a V. But now with syntactic awareness, you know, oh, this must be a noun and it's an object and it's related to cleaning. So that may allow you to guess the word and then that combining it with partial decoding, and then you'll be able to recognize the word, oh, it must be vacuum. So the explanation for vocabulary is actually similar. The difference here is that it happens in oral language instead of reading. So instead of written forms. So when children learn new vocabulary, they listen, you know, to a sentence, and then syntactic awareness may allow them to guess the meaning of a new word in a sentence. So in language acquisition, we call this syntactic bootstrapping. So I'm going to backtrack just quickly. So there might be three ways that syntactic awareness supports reading comprehension. You may support reading comprehension directly, you know, through parsing, by reducing the demands on working memory, by allowing children to monitor their own comprehension. But syntactic awareness may also support reading comprehension indirectly through word reading and vocabulary. So in statistics, we call these mediation effects. So the analysis I'm gonna present today will be mediation analysis. Okay, so the participants of my study were bilingual children. So they were, the data was collected in Canada, and these children were English-French bilinguals. So we were also interested in whether, you know, syntactic awareness measured in children's first language will support reading comprehension in their second language. So in bilingual studies, we call this phenomenon cross-language transfer. So there are different theoretical frameworks that's explain the rationale of cross-language transfer. So I'm presenting three frameworks here. So one is called the interdependence hypothesis, and it was proposed by a professor at the University of Toronto, where I am, Jim Cummins. So according to him, that first language and second language, they look different, they sound different, but they have common underlying proficiency. So he used the example of icebergs. So you have two icebergs floating on the ocean. They look separate, but underneath they're actually connected. So that's the iceberg theory. And Keiko Koda proposed the transfer facilitation model. According to this model, cross-language transfer is affected by a number of factors, linguistic factors, whether two languages are closely related. So English and French are closely related languages. They both evolved from Latin, whereas for example, English and Chinese are distantly related. There are fewer commonalities between the two languages. Another factor is structural similarities, so whether the two languages have similar structures or not. In a minute, I'll talk about the syntactic structures of English and French, and you will see their similarities, but also differences. According to the transfer facilitation model, transfer is also influenced by the relative levels of proficiency of children's first language and second language. So when children just start to learn a second language, the level of proficiency is higher in their first language than in the second language. So at this time, you're more likely to see transfer from L1, the first language, to L2, the second language. In other words, they draw on skills already developed in their first language to support second language learning. But as they become more proficient second language learners or more balanced bilinguals, you may also see transfer from second language to the first language. The third framework was actually proposed by me and my students. So we expanded Keiko Koda's transfer facilitation model and stated that transfer is also influenced by social linguistic factors such as the instructional programs. So the participants in this study, were enrolled in French immersion programs. So they were speakers of English, but they received school instruction in French. So that you will see that in this context, sometimes you see transfer in both directions, from first language to second language, and also from second language to first language, because instruction plays a role in facilitating transfer. In Keiko's model, typically, they focus on adult learners of a second language whose first language is well established. So you're more likely to see transfer from the first language to second language. All right, so I'm gonna move on here. All right, so I'll talk about the French immersion context quickly. So both English and French are official languages of Canada. So here children, when they go to school, they can choose to go to English schools or French schools. So the French immersion program is created for children whose native language is not French. So that's why it's called immersion. Francophone children, they will go to French language schools instead of French immersion. So when these children go to French immersion, they receive school instruction primarily in French or sometimes entirely in French in the early grades. But at the same time, they don't speak French at home. They speak English at home, and English is the dominant language of society. That's how they become English-French bilinguals. So over time, their French proficiency increases. By the time they finish high school, they become, most of them, I would say, become fluent in French. All right, so I'll touch upon English and French syntactic structures. I'm actually not a speaker of French. I didn't do my graduate school in Canada. I only moved here after I finished my PhD, but I do have students and colleagues in my lab who speak French, and they help me design the study. So French and English have similar syntactic structures. So they're both subject, verb, object languages, but there are also some differences between the two languages. So I'll just move on quickly. Okay, so finally we go to the present study. So in this study, we had 4 research questions. Does French syntactic awareness have a direct effect on French reading comprehension? because children were in French immersion programs, they received instruction in French. We're interested to see that whether within French, syntactic awareness was predictive of reading comprehension. We were also interested in indirect effects to see whether French syntactic awareness will have indirect effects on French reading comprehension mediated through French word reading and French vocabulary. And then we were interested in cross-language transfer. So we also measured children's syntactic awareness in English. And the question here was whether English syntactic awareness would directly affect French reading comprehension. And finally, we were also interested in indirect effects between English syntactic awareness and French reading comprehension. All right, so I'm gonna move on to the next slides. So we had 68 children in the second grade. So mean age was 7 years and 9 months. They came from 7 schools in Toronto, in the greater Toronto area, and a little over half of the kids were female. And then, so we had 6, we call them ELLs, English language learners. So they spoke English as a second language and French as a third language, meaning they were actually trilinguals. And the rest of the children spoke English at home and they learned French at school. So they were English-French bilinguals. And the average parent education was between college and university. So I just wanted to add quickly that typically educated parents tend to send their kids to French immersion programs because they understand the benefits of bilingualism and want their children to become bilingual. So that's why the average level of education in these French programs tends to be higher than that of English programs. All right, so we gave them a battery of measures in both English and French. So syntactic awareness was measured in English and French, and then reading comprehension, vocabulary, word reading were measured in French because we were mainly interested in French, which was the language of instruction, but we had some control variables, nonverbal reasoning, and word reading, which were measured in English, because that was children's stronger language. We also had a demographic questionnaire. Okay, so the syntactic awareness was basically a word order task that I showed you earlier. We give them segments of sentences of a sentence. They have to sort them into a grammatical sentence. Okay, so these are means and standard deviations. I'll skip that. So I'll show you for the sake of time. I'll talk about the results quickly. I'll skip some slides. If you have questions, please feel free to contact me. So basically, we found that within French, French syntactic awareness was not predictive of French reading comprehension, so there was no direct effect. But we found indirect effects mediated through word reading and also vocabulary. So that shows that because our kids were only in the second grade, they were younger kids, so syntactic awareness benefited word reading and vocabulary and not reading comprehension directly. And in the next model, we found cross-language transfer. So we showed that English syntactic awareness directly contributed to French reading comprehension. So we found a direct effect and also indirect effects mediated through French word reading and French vocabulary. So those are the main findings. So let me summarize the findings quickly. So the within language relationship between French syntactic awareness and French reading comprehension was not significant, no direct effect, but we found significant indirect effects mediated through French word reading and French vocabulary. the cross-language relationship between English syntactic awareness and French reading comprehension was significant. So here we found a significant direct relationship, but we also found a significant indirect relationship mediated through word reading. I think there might have been a mistake here. Sorry, I think I mispresented that. So English syntactic awareness contributed to French vocabulary, but French vocabulary did not contribute to French reading comprehension. So the mediation was only through French word reading, but not through French vocabulary. I'm sorry about that. Okay, and that's because if we go back to the French model, we could see that even though French vocabulary was significantly related to French reading comprehension, the contribution, the amount of variance it explained was significantly smaller than French word reading. So it was a weak predictor even within French. And then cross-linguistically, it stopped being significant. And this is not surprising considering that children were only in grade 2. They've only learned French for 3 years. They started in senior kindergarten. So they were definitely beginning learners of French. We know for beginning learners, word reading plays a bigger role in reading comprehension than vocabulary. All right, so discussion. Oh, yeah, so since these are emerging bilinguals with only 2 years of exposure to their L2, yeah, so less than 3 years because we tested them in grade 2 and they started in senior kindergarten, I would say 2.5 years. It may take them longer to develop sufficient skills in French syntactic awareness to allow it to emerge as a significant predictor of French reading comprehension. There is a model called the Simple View Reading Model that states that both word reading and vocabulary contribute to reading comprehension, but the roles they play change with children's age. So in younger children, word reading plays a bigger role than vocabulary. So here, consistent with the Simple View Reading Model, children in the early grades rely heavily on word reading. Within language, we found that vocabulary was a mediator through between French syntactic awareness and French reading comprehension. Yeah, but overall, we found that we found strong evidence of cross-language transfer, which shows that at this age, emerging bilingual children still rely on their first language skills to facilitate second language reading comprehension. I think I'm down there. Thank you very much. So here I'm showing a picture of my lab. It's called the Multilingualism and Literacy Lab. And these are my wonderful students. And you can see my email up there. So well, feel free to send me an email, or if you have questions, or you could ask me now. Let's see, how do I? Sorry, I'm not sure how to stop sharing. Okay, I got it. Sorry. Does anybody have questions? Do you have any comment? Yeah, Hong.
Thank you very much. Very interesting topic and also speech. I wonder, do you have also some transfer between Chinese and English if we test the Chinese children learn English, something?
Yeah, that's a good question. So bilingual researchers have looked at transfer of different aspects of metalinguistic awareness. So phonological awareness is considered to be somewhat universal. So there's definitely transfer between Chinese phonological awareness and English reading. Morphological awareness is more language specific. So research shows that because both English and Chinese have compounds, there is transfer of compound awareness, but no derivational or inflectional awareness. I'm not so sure about syntactic awareness because there hasn't been a lot of research. I haven't looked at it myself simply because it's kind of hard to recruit Chinese English bilinguals in Canada. But I know a group in Hong Kong led by Connie Ho had a couple of papers on syntactic awareness. I think they did find transfer between Chinese and English.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Because the time limited, so I think we should end it now. Thank you. Thank you very much again.
You're very welcome.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Maybe I should give the, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Professor Li. Good morning, everyone. I'm Zhang Ruijie from the School of Foreign Studies, University of Science and Technology, Beijing. It's an honor to be here to introduce the next three keynote speakers. Now, we are privileged to have Dr. Victor Cooperman in our online conference room. Dr. Cooperman is an associate professor in the Department of Linguistics and Languages and also the director of the Reading Lab at McMaster University. Now, he specializes in several areas of psycholinguistics and quantitative linguistics, including experimental and corpus-based approaches to morphology and probabilistic models of visual comprehension. He is also interested in cognitive, oculomotive, and computational aspects of eye movement behavior in reading, as well as in individual differences in literacy acquisition and text comprehension. Dr. Cooperman is leading a reading lab that features eye tracking, which is also the topic of today, and other behavioral studies. So Dr. Cooperman today is talking about eye movements in studies of reading and language learning. Please welcome Dr. Cooperman to give us the talk.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Can you hear me? Let's check whether the connection works.
Yes, Dr. Mann, we can hear you nice and clearly.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, then I will get started. So once again, I'm delighted to be part of your conference. And my topic today is the use of eye movements and eye tracking in studies of reading and language learning. I will start my presentation by talking first about what we can gain without the eye tracking. So many of us in the studies of reading have used reading comprehension tests, like the one that you see here on in the right part of the screen. So we would give our participants a text to read, and we will ask them questions. And even from this simple test, we can gain a lot. We can study fluency, which we could measure, for instance, in words per minute. That's the reading rate. And we can, of course, study the quality of their comprehension. Typically, we would look at accuracy of their responses to the questions. So even from this basic test, we could study properties of text, we could study properties of the reader, and of course, the interaction between the two, how different categories or groups of readers read specific types of texts. Now, what I will be talking about is the justification for the use of eye tracking in reading research. And if you now look at the right part of the screen, you will see a very similar text, comprehension test with questions filled with little dots. Each dot represents a fixation of an eye on the text. And as you can see, it's a much busier picture. We can actually look at how long the eye spent on specific words, which words were skipped, how many transitions were there between the different words and lines of the text, and even in the questions part, the bottom part, how long did people spend there, how much did they have to transition from the questions to the main text, and so on. So we can add a very important dimension of time to our studies, and we can study the properties of the text, the properties of the reader, and how this interaction unfolds in time. And we can do this on the scale of milliseconds and pixels. So I want to make another a demonstration or two of just what eye tracking is. And this is assuming that not everyone in the audience is knowledgeable about eye tracking. So what we see here is a picture of of a person who looks at the screen. The screen has the text on it, and the actual eye tracking part is this little box sitting behind the screen. This box might come in different forms or shapes, but what it does, it has a high precision camera which records the movements of the eye as it moves, well, two eyes truly, as they move along the lines of text. So this specific eye tracker is called iLink from a Canadian company, SI Research. So some of the advantages of eye trackers are that they are non-invasive. There's nothing touching the person. Many of them are portable, so they can be taken to schools or kindergartens or hospitals, if these are the populations that we want to study. They can work with glasses or lenses, including the person that we see in the picture here. They're good for working with infants and children, and they give a very precise temporal signal as well as high spatial precision. So here's a recording, a real-time recording of eye movements as a person reads a text in English. This is actually in text in English. It just downgraded in resolution for legibility. So the green circle represents the eye, the position of one eye on the screen. And as you can see, it proceeds in stops and jumps. So it stops at certain words for some time. We call these fixations. And then it doesn't go smoothly to the next word necessarily. It makes jumps. These we call saccades. And some of the words are not fixated even once. They are skipped. Others can be fixated more than once. I'll just start running it again. You can also see that at the end of the line, there's a big saccade to the beginning of the next line. And then occasionally the eye goes back, and typically it does so to revisit what has been read before. Typically it's done when something is unclear or there's some kind of complexity that needs to be resolved. So what the eye tracker gives us is a very detailed record of both the coordinates, the positions of where the eye lands, and also the time frame for every eye movement, including the time that is spent on each word or line. Oops. And let me move to the next slide. There we go. So why do we move our eyes at all? Well, we do so because our vision has the acuity or the sharpness for only a small number of letters. If you look at this picture, you will see that we only have a very clear view of perhaps 4 to 5 letters around the fixation point, around the point where our eye lands. As we move further away from this point, we quickly lose this sharpness, such that first, the letters blur more and more as we move away either to the right or to the left of the fixation point. So we move our eyes to get a better view of the material that needs to be read. And in a sense, and I will quote here, reading is like a slideshow where a slide is on for about a quarter of a second, representing the world as seen on one fixation. It's followed by a brief interval in which the slide is off. This is when we move our eye to the next location. And then it is followed by a new slide representing the world as seen from a new fixation point. So what we get to study in eye tracking are these slides, right? The moments of clear view that we get during a fixation, followed by a jump or a saccade, and during which the vision is blurred. And then we move to another fixation and another clear view of the text in front of us. So some of the major questions that the field of eye tracking is asking in reading are as follows. Where is the slide positioned? right? It's a spatial question. Where do we land? Where do our eyes land, and why? The second question is, when do we change slides, right? How long do we spend on this word before moving to the next piece of text? That's a temporal question. We can also ask, how broad is our slide? How much do we see in one fixation? And this tends to vary from one person to another, depending on how well we know the language and how strong our proficiency is in reading. Another interesting question that is being asked, do we get to see anything outside of that slide, right? Even if some information is blurred out, can we extract something of interest from these areas that we call parafoveal areas? We won't have the time to go over all of these questions. We will just concentrate on the second temporal point. And this is because it turns out to be very often used in studies of reading. So let's spend a little time on this representation of what eye movements we typically study. So what you see in front of you is a sentence in English. The knight attacked the windmill on his donkey. And here we'll just concentrate on one word, windmill, which we'll call an interest area. Now, in this line, you see that the fixations are numbered, and the fixations are shown as circle, and the size of the circle is representative of the duration of that fixation. That is how long we spent on specific words. So we had fixation 1 and 2 and 3, and before we came to our interest area, to the word windmill, and then fixation number 4 is the first one to land on this word. So this is a first fixation, and we are very interested in where it lands on the word, right? Which letter, and also how long it takes. Then in this example, we allocate another fixation to this word, number 5. And from this moment on, we actually move back. So fixation number 6 is a regression, which is what we call saccades that go back. So it's a fixation that went to a word that we've already seen. So we are then considering fixations 4 and 5 as the first pass on this word. These are the fixations that landed on the word before we moved to the left or to the right, before we left the word for the first time. So together, the durations of these fixations are very telling about the initial effort that we put into processing this word. We can see in this example that after fixation number 6, the eye went back to that same word. Fixation number 7 lands there as well. And then we can consider the total time that the eye spent on this fixation, on this word. So this is just a small sample of the eye movement measures that we can consider for one simple word. First fixation, first pass, total time, whether or not there was a regression, and so on and so forth. So all of this is given, all this information is given to us for free by an eye tracking technology, and this is what we use for the analysis of reading data. So let's concentrate on the when of eye movements. The when meaning how long it was spent with our eyes on a certain word. So the hypothesis that links the behavior of the eye and the behavior of our mind is called the eye-mind linking hypothesis. And it says that we look at the word as long as we process it. It's been found to be not 100% accurate, but it's a good approximation. What it means is that the duration of processing, how long we look at the word, reflects how difficult it is to process that word. And this is what we mostly make use of in our studies. If there is any complexity, if there's any ambiguity that needs to be resolved, it usually is reflected in longer fixations on the word. So through eye fixations, we can study time course of cognitive processing. Let's look at a couple of examples given in the picture in the bottom of the screen. So it's the same text, which in the right side of the slide is read by a very proficient adult reader, whereas in the left part of the slide, it is read by a child with dyslexia. What you can see here is the huge difference in the number of fixations, also the duration of fixations, which are shown as very small circles, so fast fixations here in the right, and very big circles, long duration of fixations on the left. So what we have learned through decades of eye tracking research is that greater processing effort reflects itself in more fixations, longer fixations, a larger number of regressions, that is looking back, and a less amount of skipping. There are fewer words that are skipped by a poor reader than by a good reader in the text. So with this knowledge, we can create experiments that manipulate linguistic complexity or the reading skill and look for the signs of increased processing effort. So this is truly a very simplified logic of a typical reading study. We do something to the text, or we select readers in a specific way that would highlight their contrast, and we expect the processing effort and the durations of the eye movements to be different as well. So here's one classic example of a very, very robustly shown effect in reading studies in virtually all languages that I know of, the word frequency effect. So if we think of words that occur more often in the language, they typically take less time to be processed than the ones that occur less frequently in the language. So here's an example from Inhofe and Rayner, 1986, where we have two sentences that are only different in one word. So the first sentence reads, "Deb didn't read the chapter when I told her what was in it." And the second example has a less frequent word, tabloid. In all other respects, these sentences are the same. They are identical. And then participants read these sentences, and we can measure the eye movement to the words chapter versus tabloid. And indeed, it's easy to find that more frequent words like chapter are recognized with less effort. So fewer fixations, shorter fixations, fewer regressions to the word, more skips, than are less frequent words like tabloid. In this experiment, we also learned when exactly the difference between high and low frequency words occurs. And so we can learn the time course of effects. And it turns out that frequency effects are early. They show up in skipping and first fixation duration. So as soon as we encounter this word, we already see the difference between high and low frequency stimuli. In a similar way, we can run eye tracking studies not just on words, but on a sublexical level. We can look at differences in letters, phonemes, morphemes. We can look at lexical properties, formal or semantic properties of words. We can study syntactic structures, and we can study even the entire discourse. So longer texts and their role, for instance, of connecting words in these texts or headings or markers of logical structure. And we won't have the time to give examples of all these types of studies, but they're plentiful and very interesting. Chinese presents an excellent example on how real serious models of eye movements in reading need to be cross-linguistic. Chinese, of course, has an extraordinary writing system, which has now been studied more and more. And one of the fascinating properties of the system is that words are not separated by spaces. And so the question arises, how do proficient readers of Chinese find the boundaries between words? And what happens if the words are artificially separated by spaces? Would this help reading Chinese, or would it be detrimental because of how unfamiliar it is, and so on. So one of the studies that one of the first studies done in this topic by et al. 2008 took one and the same sentence and presented it in 4 different ways. One was the normal unspaced condition. That's how the sentence would look in the regular Chinese text reading. The second condition separated every single character by a space, which of course is not really respecting the usual way of writing in Chinese. A third condition respected the boundaries between words, right? So what was separated by spaces were expected word units. And finally, there was a spacing condition that would go against the expected word boundaries and would separate characters in a illogical way. So the point of the study was to see whether it is a character, whether a character or a word is a unit of reading reading in Chinese. So conditions 1 and 3, the normal unspaced condition, and the condition where words were separated by a space in a logical expected way, they produce the same reading times. Both conditions 2 and 4 showed increased reading times. They showed more processing effort. So that led these group of authors to conclude that it's a word and not a character that is a unit of reading in Chinese, and that in condition 3, even though spaces are unfamiliar and might increase the processing effort because of that, the time that it took to read the sentence was the same as a normal unspaced condition, meaning that there might be some advantage, especially for language learners, if words are separated in Chinese by spaces. These were the findings of this paper, which since then have been discussed with counter examples and examples in favor in big numbers. I'm moving on to the next example. And this one comes from our own work that we've done in eye tracking studies of text reading. Specifically, it's a work that combined or brought together 13 languages and 13 different labs under an umbrella of the multilingual corpus of eye movements, the so-called MECO corpus. So this project collected eye tracking data in L1 and L2 text reading in 13 languages. To be more precise, L1 language, L2 was always English, and so it used this project used comparable readers, so university students, comparable texts, and eye tracking apparatus. So it has good methodological uniformity between all samples. We've published 2 papers so far on these on this corpus, presenting results of the L1, so reading in the first language, and L2, reading in the second language parts. So here's a list of 13 languages that we published as part of Wave 1. I'm very happy to say that Wave 2 is happening as well. We're collecting more languages that we'll publish soon. And these will include both the traditional and the simplified Chinese texts that we're very grateful to our colleagues to have collected. So all of the participants were undergraduate university students in the age range of 18 to 30, and they were typically proficient readers of English as well. So they were good readers of English as a second language. MECO L1 had 12 texts in the native language of readers. Texts were in the Wikipedia style, followed by the yes/no comprehension questions. And we would take an English text and we would have it translated into all kinds of languages. And this is what the L1 reading would look like in the respective language of the country. MECO L2, this is where every participant would read text in English as well. And this is a within participant study. So same people read L1 and English texts. So here's one example of an English text with the questions following. We also conducted some skill tests of English, looking at vocabulary, spelling, decoding, and so on. And just to give you an idea of the differences in L2 reading, we're looking in the left panel on skipping rate. That's how often people would not even fixate on words. And what you see highlighted here is on top here, these are English native speakers, Canadians. And this one is an ellipsis that shows German speakers. So it's easy to see that English readers, when reading in the English language, showed signs of higher proficiency because they skipped more words, right? Most other languages skipped fewer words. A second panel, the right panel, is total fixation time. And this is where English readers showed the fastest reading versus the German readers who read slower. So all of this is in line with what we would expect from more versus less proficient readers, only now we can show it in the same data with the same methodology for readers with different first language backgrounds. Now, the last point I wanted to make is that the MECO data allows us to shed new light on what L2 reading comprehension is made of. So if you look at this pyramid, it's often been argued that what you need to have for your L2 reading comprehension is literacy in your first language, good knowledge of component skills of reading in your L2, and several other factors that we'll skip in the interest of time. So because in our data, in the MECO project, we have participants read both in their L1 and L2, we can actually study directly how their proficiency in their first language predicts their proficiency in their second language. And this specific example is for the reading rate in words per minute. We have L1 reading rate on the horizontal axis, L2 reading rate on the vertical axis. Each dot represents a participant. We have about 405 participants here. And it's easy to see that the correlation in their reading rate is very strong, right? So about almost 55% of the variance in the L2 reading rate is predicted by the L1 reading rate. And this can be explained by several factors. First is that language proficiency is shared across L1 and L2. Chances are that if you learned your first language better, you might have better ability in learning your second language. But it also might have a completely extra linguistic explanation, cognitive speed. If you are fast in cognitive tasks of any sort, you will be fast both in your L1 and in your L2 reading. And I'm aware of the time, so I will skip a few slides, but I will just, and I can come back to them in the question session, but I will just summarize that L1 reading behavior reflects cross-linguistic differences in language structures. L2 reading comprehension and fluency are found to be radically different. It's easy for advanced learners to reach good reading comprehension, but not the reading fluency. We found that L2 reading performance is predicted by L1 performance in a much stronger way than believed earlier. And finally, I hope that I convinced you that eye tracking is a valuable technique for studying reading and language learning. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Koopman, for sharing this inspiring talk on eye tracking and how to apply it in linguistic analysis. Now it's open for questions and comments. Anyone from the audience? Or online audiences? Okay, Dr. Koopman, may I have just one very quick question about the reading materials you have mentioned in the examples. So I noticed that one of the research includes 20 or 13 languages, and you mentioned that you translated the reading scripts from English, right?
This is correct, yes.
Yes, okay. So I'm curious, is there any reason for the translation, or if you can just find out some original reading materials? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we wanted the text to be comparable both in their content and their size. But it's a great question. What we actually did, we had about half of the text translated. They were indeed translated from English. For the other half, we asked our partners to create text on the same topics as in English, but they would be original. So they would represent the original syntactic structures and the lexicon and so on. So we did not constrain half of the text by anything, only by the overall topic. And this was done exactly with probably what you have in mind, right? To make sure that the original structural and lexical diversity of respective languages is studied as well.
Okay, thank you, Cooperman, and thank you again for showing us the great potential of eye tracking in doing linguistic research and also in reading proficiency and language acquisition research. Thank you very much. And anyone who wants to have further discussion, could you, Dr. Cooperman, could you provide your email for further context or?
Absolutely. So it's on my slides, but I'm happy to send it to the organizers, and please contact me. I'll be very happy to continue the conversation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. All right. So thank you, Dr. Cooperman. And for our next keynote speech, we are very honored to have Professor Chen Hongjun in our online conference room. And Professor Chen is the Dean of the School of Foreign Languages, Dalian University of Technology. He is the standing director and a board member of several leading national associations, such as the China Cognitive Linguistics Association and the Chinese Association of Psycholinguistics. He is also the review expert for the National Social Science Fund of China, Discipline Ranking of Liaoning Province, and other works. Professor Chen has done profound work in cognitive linguistics, neurolinguistics, SLA, and cross-cultural communication. His work includes 40 research articles in leading international and national journals, over 10 course books, and a monograph. So he is also contributing to the academia by reviewing articles for journals, including Lingua, Foreign Languages and Their Teaching, and Foreign Language Learning, Theory and Practice. So today, Professor Chen's topic is the effect of executive control ability on bilingual metaphor processing, an ERP study. Let's welcome Professor Chen to give his talk.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zhang. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks to Professor Xue's invitation, it's my real honor to give a talk at this very important forum, the third International Symposium on Language Science in the Year of Artificial Intelligence. The talk I'm going to give today is also an unpublished research. So it's a ERP study jointly done with my jointly supervised PhD student Zhu Jiaqi and Professor Yamo in University of Jyväskylä in Finland. And the title of this talk is The Role of Executive Control or Controllability in Metaphor Comprehension of Second Language, the ERP study. Actually, the metaphor comprehension study or processing study during the recent years, recent decades, I should say, starting from 1970s, 1980s, in recent decades have gained a lot of attention, from the researchers worldwide, and also the publication is really huge. And the reason is really metaphor as a very special form of language or linguistic expression, is really unique. Actually, a lot of researchers, including those famous scholars like Lakoff and Johnson, they think that metaphor is not only linguistic expression, is also represents the way of thinking, right? So it's very important to see how language and thinking are interrelated. And also in recent years, metaphor is also widely studied in the field of embodiment, because for the embodiment theory, there are two versions usually. One is strong and one is weak. And then, so a lot of researchers think that metaphor, and embodiment, especially metaphor comprehension, just involves the weak embodiment. But it's really controversial. And also, it's meaningful for artificial intelligence and clinical linguistics. But in more and more, actually, a lot of research, because I think a big proportion of the people in the world actually is bilingual. So the bilingual representation of metaphor is also very important to see. And then I'd like to show you one small video, actually, which is made by one of my students, actually working doing the PhD in the University of Uvascular, to see the how Chinese metaphor and the English metaphor are processed, and of course by using the MEG, method, and then you can see this is a literal sentence, or this is the metaphor, and this abstract meaning comprehension. I'd like to show you this animated video. It's very interesting. You can see as the time goes on, the different brain areas actually respond to these three conditions actually differently across the two different languages, and then show different patterns of processing literal, metaphor, and abstract. Of course, this is also unpublished, and is going to be published this year. And then actually addressing the metaphor comprehension today, there are mostly two key issues actually still which are still controversial. One is how metaphor, especially the time course of metaphor processing, especially it is according to SPM, standard pragmatic model by Rice and Searle. The actually metaphor is processed with 3 steps, but a lot of controversial studies. So time course, if it is same as literal, is really very important. And the other one is lateralization. Is left or right lateralized. So this is also a controversial issue. And then addressing these issues, a lot of researchers, give some theories. For example, Richard Black, but this is analogy. This is more from the philosophy side, the analogy theory, and of course, Lakoff's conceptual mapping theory is very familiar to us. And Glucksberg and in 1993 proposed categorization. So I won't elaborate on the detail, but all of them actually just think that according to Professor Ni Chuanbin and his student study, all of these theories actually consider, or can be categorized into 3 types. One is comparison, the other one is abstraction and the matching. between the features of the source domain and the target domain. This from source to target domain, the features are mapped according to Lakoff. And then this something about metaphor processing and the importance. And then, yesterday a lot of several researchers, actually, or professors have mentioned the executive functions or executive control ability. Executive control ability refers to a family of top-down mental processes needed when you have to concentrate and pay attention, right? Its essence is to control and regulate other cognitive processes and produce coordinated, orderly, and purposefully behavior. So according to the Leto, there are three components of executive control ability or executive functions. One is shifting, the other one is inhibition, and then updating. But of course, actually, other researchers, for example, Meltzer, they also believe the executive functions consist of these things. Some are overlapping, of course, but all in all, you see the executive functions or executive control really plays a very important role in neurocognitive domain in mediating the other functions, right? For including the language, in the language. So the executive functions actually really, develop as you grow up, as a person grows up, and also is will decrease, right, as you become old. So it actually it's very important to see the development of executive functions and the language. They just as you grow up, the executive functions become more and more stronger, and the language, of course, is developed right at the same time. And this figure just shows the metaphor competence development. From this, we can see it is I think consistent with the language development, but of course it's delayed. This process delayed because metaphor understanding or comprehension really requires more, I think, executive function or control ability, maturity, right? And then, so among all the theories and the models, we found that actually there are two. One is structural building theory by Gernsbacher, and the other one is predication predication model by Kinch. Both of them address these things, especially information storage and integration. And of course, these two theory and models address the comprehension of a metaphor from. One is for example, the structural building is more from the psycholinguistics, and then the Kinch predication is more from the computational linguistics. So this study attempts to, I just want to say that the attempts to see the interface between the psycholinguistics and computational linguistics. We try to see if they can be coupled. And of course, this also, this idea is, we got this idea from the discussion with the computational linguists, including some professor in our university, right? They are also interested in metaphor study, but they want to see if their idea is consistent with the psycholinguistic study. So for predication model, there are two components. This one is called LSA, the latent semantic analysis. The other one is the CI, the construction integration. And this two, LSA is a contextual theory of meaning. It represents the meaning of word by its relationship to other words in semantic space. And while CI uses SLA factor to construct the interaction of interpretation of statements. So it means that the argument selects those features of the predicate that are appropriate for it and inhibits the features that do not apply or apply less aptly. So this the predication model, if we use Glucksberg's example of my lawyer is a shark, have a look at the figure, you see this bold lines just suggest that indicate the strong links, right? From the lawyer actually has strong links with these features, or sometimes we'll call it the attributes, right? While the shark has a strong links with these ones. But you see, if we want to understand this metaphor, we have to inhibit some, and we have to facilitate some or enhance some. So here actually, this for example, the first 4 of these are appropriate for the metaphor and enter into meaning because with the bold lines, right? Well, the last 5 are irrelevant and are suppressed. So these are suppressed. If you want to understand the lawyer, what is really a lawyer is, okay? And then, so compare with understand the literal meaning, the semantic features between argument and predicate of a metaphor is usually distant. It's necessary to activate a wider range of neighboring semantics and so on. Okay, but all in all, so you see the inhibition function plays a very important role, right, in a comprehension understanding. And another theory, structural building theory by Gernsbacher, actually he proposed that there are 3 processes in this theory: laying a foundation, mapping information onto a foundation, and shifting. So I won't elaborate on the detail of. And then also there are 2 mechanisms that control this building function. One is suppression and enhancement. So you see suppression, inhibition is very similar to the predication model, although that's the computational model. And then so this both models emphasize the importance of inhibition and activation in language comprehension. These are included in the domain general executive control. So what are the influencing factors and what are the researchers? So a lot of researchers have have done some researches. For example, for this one, the executive functional control ability degree. So these researchers just try to see high EC and the low EC, how they respond to, you see, the metaphor understanding. So they show that high EC really respond faster to the priming and then also to the metaphor comprehension. Some other study like Kenneth try to see the creativity, if this is important, if it is important to metaphor comprehension, because creativity also related to executive process or executive function, and also suggests higher creative individual faster, right? And for patient study, the similar results. And then the effect of executive control ability on comprehension, metaphor comprehension also involves working memory, right? This working study with the working memory shows that with better working memory and better inhibitory control, so you can have a faster, constructing, interpreting speed for metaphors. And then in the metaphor study field, familiarity is also very important factor. It actually, sometimes facilitating, sometimes inhibiting. But here, some researchers just have done some research to see the joint influence of these two, the executive controllability and the familiarity of metaphor comprehension. All these studies just shows that familiarity doesn't play a very important role, in the understanding of metaphor comprehension. But it's really controversial. But this is a joint influence. So our research objective is to see the mechanism of L2 comprehension. with between different executive control abilities. And then we use the semantic priming paradigm, and also to see the Chinese EFL learners, especially second language learners, to see these different word pairs, how they respond to different word pair. These are the research questions. There are two research questions. One is something to do with the time course. The other one is about the lateralization, and to see the joint influence of familiarity. But our point is to see to use the ERP to see the difference. And then the participants, altogether there are 30 participants, because one data is excluded. And then the English proficiency is controlled, and for the executive control ability, we just use the Stroop task to divide them into the two groups. One is the high, the other one is low executive control group. You see of course, the difference is significant between the two groups. The Stroop task is the procedures like this. We just adapted the Hadameyer's the paradigm or to do this Stroop task. And then the materials, we just derive these materials from the previous study, and we also test them with the three factors test control, like relatedness and attributes or familiarity, especially familiarity. We just divide them into three types or three word pairs. One is familiar, unfamiliar, literal, all of them by statistical analysis. We see there are significant difference between them, but between high and the literal, there's no significant difference. And the procedures like this, we just adapt the semantic priming paradigm by Lisa and Dr. Li. And this is the procedure. We just extracted the ERP with this the second target word onset. And then we use the ANT EEG recording system. This is the normal EEG recording data processing. And then the statistical analysis, we analyze, we use the repeated measures. We conduct the repeated measures ANOVAs, and then we do the within subject factors and between group factors study. The behavioral study, the results is like this, and is here. And then there are the main effect of a group. In other words, actually the two groups, the high and the low, really are significantly different. And then the accuracy rate, no difference, no significant difference for accuracy. The ERP result, this is the general, the grand average of ERP waveforms. We can see the high usually is more positive, right? And while the low is more negative. This is really quite reasonable. And this is the brain topograph showing the N400 topograph. We can see really show the different pattern. But for the time course, is really quite similar. We can hardly say they are different for the time course, right? And also the mean values of N400 amplitude. We can see they are different from the region over frontal, central, and the parietal regions, right? In the three word pair expression of high and the low executive control group. And this is the lateralization, and then this of course, actually, because of time limit, I won't elaborate on this analysis. Also, we conducted the LPC component study. This is the brain topograph, the different patterns, and then this is the region from the front to the parietal, and then this is the left to right, the comparison. Yeah, and then we see this is the discussion. We first discuss on the time course of metaphor. Time course of metaphor comprehension. We see the time course actually no difference, especially this the early stage. So we just analyze in accordance with the predication model, and then the structure building model and other theories. We see that really actually the time course is different, are similar, but for high and low, the familiarity really doesn't play very much role. And then this is for LPC's the study and the discussion, and then right, we found that familiarity has an effect of low executive control group in metaphor comprehension at early stage, which is different from late stage. So from late stage, it doesn't play much role. So you just assume that predication model is inadequate in explaining why there are different effects of familiarity in the early and the late stage of low executive control group. For a high executive control group, actually familiarity doesn't play very much role. So this is the brain region involvement or the lateralization discussion. Right, so all in all, I want to jump to the conclusion because the time is almost up. And then we found that the executive control ability doesn't affect the time course of metaphor comprehension, which also has nothing to do with the metaphor familiarity. In other words, actually, for the time course, the familiarity doesn't play much role in comprehending the second language, metaphor. In the early stage of metaphor comprehension, the frontal and the left hemisphere of high executive control group show more involvement than the low executive control group. In the late stage of metaphor comprehension, more right hemisphere are recruited in both high and low executive control group, which is not affected by executive control ability. Because LPC, especially the late stage, usually stands for the integration of semantic and the syntactic meaning or syntactic integration. So this really, when we comprehend the second language metaphor, we need to use more cognitive load resources to integrate the meaning and the syntax. So in addition, the relationship between the involvement of different brain regions and the executive control ability during metaphor comprehension was not modulated by familiarity in both early and the late stages. So we found that it is assumed that executive control ability of L2 learners has a significant effect on L2, L2 metaphor comprehension. This study partly supports the predication model to some extent and points out the inadequate explanation of a joint influence of executive control ability and the familiarity in the late stage of L2 metaphor comprehension. This is my introduction or presentation of our research. These are the references. Thank you for listening. So Dr. Zhang, thank you. And if you have any question, yes, I can put my email in the chat. So we can exchange through emails, right?
Okay, thank you, Professor Chen. Thank you for sharing your unpublished work with us. And as Professor Chen has said, for anyone who is interested in this area, please reach out to him through his email address. Thank you, Professor Chen, for being here. And yes, now we are very honored to have our Professor Xue Jin here on the stage for our next keynote talk. And Professor Xue is the doctoral supervisor and also director of the Center for Advancement of Language Sciences here in the School of Foreign Studies, USDB. She's also a council member of the Chinese Association of Psycholinguistics and China Cognitive Linguistics Association, and an executive member of the Chinese Association for Language Cognition and Intelligent Development. Professor Xue has chaired several major projects in language cognition and brain mechanism, neurolinguistics, second language acquisition, and psycholinguistics, which include 2 projects funded by the National Social Science Foundation of China and many other international or national level projects. Her accomplishments include 7 monographs and over 50 papers published in journals like Neuropsychology, Journal of Communication Disorders, Frontiers in Psychology, and others. She also serves as a reviewer in international journals such as Language, Cognition, and Neuroscience, and Annal of Dyslexia. So today, Professor Xue is giving us a topic on narrative development of Chinese children with developmental language disorder. Let's welcome Professor Xue.
Okay, it's my great honor to speak on this topic. The topic is about narrative profiles of Chinese school-age children with developmental language disorders. And here's the long line. I try to describe developmental language disorder narrative, and then I report some findings on narrative difficulties in children, Chinese children with DLD. And lastly, I reported 1 preliminary study on intervention of Chinese school-age children. So about DLD, developmental language disorders, actually it has been called specific language impairment. This type of language impairment is a specifically developmental one and also related to communication disorders. And DLD interferes with understanding, language comprehension, and also study. Usually, children with DLD will have some problems in reading, listening, writing, speaking. So this DLD has affect children in about with the affecting rate is about 8%. So children with DLD have some characteristic. The typical symptom is language developmental delay, and DLD will also have some impairments in cognitive and linguistic skills, such as working memory, syntax, morphology, semantics, and word finding, and pragmatic problems. So it is unique, it is urgent for us to provide some intervention for these children. And how to describe DLD? Usually, according to the very famous model, this one typical model proposed by Taplin. So EPI-SI model, according to this model, usually DLD is defined or screened by 5 dimensions, including expression, comprehension, vocabulary, grammar, and narration. So according to the models or researchers usually define DOD by norms of the speakers. These are some previous research on how they defined DOD. Usually, based on the 5 dimensions, researchers will define each dimensions. There are some criteria, specifically the standards of 1 or 1.25 standard deviation below the mean of the grade norm that might be defined as the impairment in that aspect, or one or more than one aspect in the 5 dimensions. However, this kind of non-referenced measures or standardized non-reference measures might have some problems, especially one problem is the biases to culturally or linguistically diverse children. Thus, hereby, we propose narrative sample analysis could be one tool that might aid the screening or discriminating the DOD, because narrative sample analysis is proved to be friendly to children in different cultures or linguistic backgrounds. So how about what is narrative ability? Actually, we are so familiar with this. Narrative ability is important for daily communication or school performance. And the narrative construction usually involves several skills at different levels, such as lexical, sentential, discourse levels, and production of narrative should integrate different layers of knowledge, include word knowledge, knowledge about story structures, such as how the story grammar of a scenario. So and also about linguistic knowledge, including, for instance, lexical and syntactic, and some cohesive devices. So narrative ability might involve or the production of narratives should integrate different knowledges and skills. But how to measure the narrative skills in literature? Because narratives involve those knowledges and skills, so researchers usually tap into narrative skills into 2 aspects: macro and micro. Macro structure deal with the binding of the story. This is the general overall structure. Usually, it is defined by, for instance, story elements and story structure. Story element is usually analyzed by whether the narrative might include the following elements, such as character, setting, the initiating events, or response, plan, attempt, and outcome. And the story structure might be analyzed by different the patterns of how the story is constructed or presented. One example by Patterson and McCabe analyzed the story structure into several developmental patterns, including, for instance, from one event to two event, then to, for instance, the miscellaneous pattern, and then finally to the classic pattern. So this is about my macro structure tapped into the overall story structure. And about the second dimension, that is a microstructure. Microstructure deal with linguistic features or specific language features. So this include the levels of vocabulary, syntax, and cohesive devices. So in literature, usually the researchers might include indices such as the story length, lexical diversity, syntactic complexity, and about the story length, usually we might use some measures such as the total words of the narrative, and lexical diversity might include, for instance, the total number of diverse or different words, and the syntactic complexity might include, for instance, those specific language sentence structures in that language, or the occurrence of the clauses, etc. So from previous studies, usually scholars might analyze narrative ability from these micro and macro structures. So about the studies on children on narrative development and narrative disorders. So previous studies from alphabetic language show that children with DLD might display difficulties in all the two dimensions, micro and macro. For example, for microstructures, those children with DLD might show fewer story components, such as might have a limited story elements. For instance, they might be limited or constrained in presenting the plan or solution of the story. And about the microstructure, those children with DLD might display, for instance, fewer NDW, that is number of diversified words, and shorter MLU, and shorter mean length of utterances, and also syntactic deficit shown in limited fewer occurrence of those complex sentences. So these are findings from alphabetic languages. About Chinese language. For Chinese, we say Chinese have some specific lexical and syntactic features. For some instance, about referential forms, we know Chinese nominal usually have no determiners, and for those Chinese nouns, we usually add some classifiers. And then for clauses, Chinese is the sentence might be stacked with each other, and we usually combine the sentences without connectives. And for sentence structures, there are some sentence syntactic structure that are unique in Chinese. For instance, there are some serial word structures, just combine the two or more than two words together to become a sentence. So Chinese is also called zero topic or pro-drop language. That means a Chinese language is a kind of a discourse-oriented. Usually, it might allow the maximum freedom of a noun or noun object in a sentence. So these are some examples of unique syntax structures in lexical and syntactic features in Chinese. These syntactic features might have some impact on narrative production or construction because the different syntax structure might pose different demands and cognitive processing, and also, for instance, in narrative, according to previous studies, say Chinese children might show shorter mean length of utterance in narratives because maybe because of there are no subject or object in the sentence, and also they may show and some studies might also show because there are no connectives in between sentences, so Chinese sentences might be longer than the alphabet languages. However, those studies are mostly focused on preschools. So SCARES has previous findings addressed the school-age Chinese children. So this is also motivations for our study. So our study, this study asks two questions. First question is about did Chinese-speaking children with DLD differ significantly from chronological age-matched typical developing children in macro structure of narratives. Macro structure was defined by story grammar and story structure. And the second research question is the two groups, that means children with DLD and their typical developing age-matched children, would the two groups show differences in microstructure measures? Microstructure measures were defined in several dimensions, including lexical and syntax. Okay. According to these two questions, we include, we screen two groups of, actually four groups, four group of participants, from lower grades. We include 58 children, and a higher grade, about 52 children. And a lower group students are from grade 1 to grade 3, and upper than grade 3 were included in higher grade. And they were measured on these, they were measured on age, nonverbal reasoning, vocabulary, PPVD means vocabulary, and receptive grammar, and CCC means that this is a communication questionnaire by Bishop. We translate it into Chinese. So this is about a high point analysis. High point analysis was used to analyze the macro structure, to analyze the story, the structure of the story. This is based on the Patterson and McCabe. So this is one example in the narrative. If the sample just describe the picture without telling the events, so that is the kind we just give we score, give the score of 0. But if the narrative build up to the high point with complete component story, complete components means there are sub characters and what happened, and where all the settings, characters, and events. So this is classic. So we score the narratives. We adopt the high point analysis to analyze the macro structure. So, and about the microstructure include some measures of linguistic features, including lexical features and syntactic. And this is also analyzed. The cohesion is also analyzed, and cohesion includes the form and the devices for forms and forms that might use in analyzing the cohesion. We analyze the devices that might used to express or to aid the narrative development. So these are we analyze from the forms, and these are functions. What kind of word I used to analyze to construct the narrative. So, this is the result for the analysis, microstructure. Say we found that from these are the descriptive data, and we found there is a main effect on language ability. That means here SLI, this is a reciprocal with the DLD. Say language ability means that there were significant difference between DLD and the typical development children, and combined lower grade and higher grade were combined. And there is also a main effect of grade. That means a lower grade and higher grade. In between them, there was a significant difference between the higher and lower grade. In other words, that means that there was a developmental pattern of all the macro structures, developmental patterns. And so further test on the number of narrative patterns, okay, we found that specifically typical developing children was quite different from those DLD children. So about a microstructure, these are measures of basic measures for lexical and syntactic features, total number of words, number of different words, and total number of utterance, and the mean length of utterance. The first one, this is a measure of the story length, and the second, about the diversity of the vocabulary, and also TNW, also the length of the story, and the mean length utterance. I think this measure for syntax. So according to this table, we found that is there's the higher and lower grade, they differ between DLD and the TD children. There is a main effect of group difference. That means TD children and DLD children are different. They are very different in TNW and also in NDW, and they the mean length utterances and great group differences, and there are also great differences. Okay, on mean length utterances, great differences. This might have some implications that there is a developmental pattern. That means children might overcome their difficulty in the length of the utterances with the increasing of the education. So about the microstructure, we also analyze the syntax complexity. Actually, we include the complex syntax structures. All these syntax structures are unique in Chinese, so we analyze all of them. So according to the statistic, we have it may affect our language ability. That means TD and DLD children, they differ greatly on the complex syntax structures, and there is an interaction between language ability and the syntax structure. That means interaction of grade and language group. That means syntactic structures are impaired in the DLD, and specifically the simple effect analysis showed that DLD children fell short of the TD children. Okay, so specifically on this cultural subject in the biblical structures, and for the microstructures, we also found we analyzed the conjunctions, and the different conjunctions. And we also find great differences and ability and the interaction between language ability and conjunctive. In other words, that is the simple effect analysis show that the TD children show profound difficulties in using, for instance, temporality, conjunction with temporality. So this is the further analysis on the referential, the cohesion devices. We analyze from the three function: introduction, maintenance, and switch, and we find the significant differences between DOD and TD children on all the three dimensions from introduction, maintenance, and switch. So this study has the following two major findings, saying micro and macro structures in narrative are sensitive to difficulties of children with DLD, and also specifically some linguistic features such as referential forms, adequacy, indices of Mandarin Chinese complex structures are sensitive linguistic difficulty for children specifically. So in other words, when we talk about children, school-age children with the school-age Chinese-speaking children with DLD, we should take into consideration of the language features. So because Chinese have several linguistic features, specific, unique linguistic features, and also we found that in most studies adjust to preschool children. So and also and for the sake of education, also for the sake of in lifting the narrative difficulty for both TD and DLD children. So it's also if it is necessary, also or it is an urge for us to do some intervention studies. So what is the intervention, or hereby we focus on narrative intervention. Narrative intervention is defined as referred to any language intervention processes that participants are involved in telling or retelling stories in which the interventionist targets some socially academic important language features. So although a previous research pointed out that there are some cultural differences in narrative structure, it is reasonable for us to teach mainstream narrative structure to culturally and linguistically diverse children. So previous research also have established several a lot of different narrative-based intervention programs, including story champs, story grammar markers, and supporting knowledge in language and literacy. We call the scale. This is the intervention program we adopt. So in the following, I will report some preliminary findings on intervention study. This is research we have submitted. Now we are in a second revision. We asked the two questions: did children with and without DLD respond differently in narrative intervention? And also, if yes, how were intervention effects differentiated in oral and written narratives? So more information about the skill program. And actually, this program provided by what was established by Gillen in 2016, maybe earlier than that. So the program aimed to improve the necessary cognitive language skills that might help the children to recall information in narratives, and also to improve children's ability to create coherent story structures within a causal framework. And third, to improve students' metacognitive skill to integrate textual and discourse information with existing linguistic and conceptual knowledge. So in our program. This is an 8-week intervention, and specifically, there are 3 steps. First, in the intervention, in each week of the intervention, first we develop the basic components. We target at the story grammar and causal time relations. And the second, we develop story complex in the second steps. In this second step, we focus on plot capacity, syntax structure, and mental state words. And the last stage, we focus on narrative production. So these are icons we used to facilitate children's comprehension or cognitive skills. And this is the sample of the story we used to elicit story telling and retelling. So in the intervention, we also measure two dimensions, micro and macro indices. And about the microstructures, as I explained just now, these are measures, and including story length and vocabulary, diversity of the vocabulary, and also so lexical level, mental state words, and about the intervention. That is the microstructure. And micro and macrostructure indices, we analyze the story grammar. And this is the preliminary findings about the oral narratives. We have main effect the language group, specifically on complex syntax structures, and also have main effect of test time. Test time means that is intervention effect. Intervention effect specifically on story grammar temporal markers. And there is an intervention effect on story grammar, complex syntax structure, and causal markers. A simple effect analysis revealed that before the intervention, the two groups differ greatly on this measure. But after intervention, the two groups have no difference on this measure. That means somewhat children with DLD might have difficulties on all these measures, but somewhat they might be intervened, or this kind of difficulty might be measured, might be relieved after intervention. So about the written narrative, we have similar findings, and may affect group difference on NDW, and the test time that intervention effect all those measures, and intervention effect on TTU similarly. That means after intervention, the two groups have no differences on TTU, total number of utterance. Okay, so findings about intervention, that's the positive intervention effect, and on both oral and written narrative. And also we found different response patterns to narrative intervention between children with and without DLD. So this project, I would like to thank my students in this project. Okay, thank you. That's all for my presentation.
All right, thank you, Professor Xie, for this very meaningful research, which calls our attention to the language disorder of Chinese preschool children, and also how linguists could contribute to this matter. And I'm handing the stage to Professor Xie for the rest of this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will take over the position of the host. It's my great honor to introduce next speaker, Dr. Li Lunbao, at Fujian Normal University. And Dr. Li Lunbao is also a chair deputy chair at Chinese Association of Psycholinguistics. And let me introduce more about him. He usually use the neurocognitive research method in dealing with some research questions, including the bilingual lexical representation and bilingual lexical access. And especially, he's interested in how the phonological appearance by inference in phonological awareness and reading literacy development. And the metacognitive development for dialect children. And so far, he has presided over 2 projects of Social Science Foundation and 1 project from Humanities and Social Science Foundation from Ministries of Education, and 2 other projects from Social Science Foundation in Fujian Province. And he has also participated in 1 key project from Humanities of Social Science Foundation. And he also was rewarded by in the 5th Social Science Excellency research findings in Fujian Province, and she has also published a series of important papers in peer-reviewed accredited journals. Okay, welcome, Professor Li.
好的，谢谢谢景教授的介绍啊，谢谢大会的邀请。我用汉语讲。那么，大家看得到我的视频吗？谢老师看得到我的视频吗？
可以，很清楚。
好的。那么今天我要讲的题目是双语者的语义表征建构及其通达机制。那么讲这样一个问题，它来源于很多的困惑。首先一个就是我最精通的是方言，然后在30年前，我认为我也精通汉语，也就是说我很会说普通话，但是后来我才知道，我说的实际上不是普通话，而是一种混合式的，既是方言，也有一点像普通话的普通话。那么直到30年，差不多20多年前，有了拼音输入法的时候，我才意识到我以前讲的普通话很不普，以至于有一次我在我的博士导师，跟我闲聊的时候，他说我没有想到我能听懂你的普通话，因为你是福建人，福建人的普通话我一般听不懂，他在北京。那我就想，我说，如果你听得懂我的普通话，这么说，可能我的普通话是很差，所以自那个以后，也就是说有键盘输入法以后，我就开始学习了汉语拼音，然后我再对我过去的普通话进行了反省，想想哪个是说对的，哪个是不对的。实际上后来我发现我的普通话大部分是错的，所以当我跟外国人说话的时候，我可能不会去担心外国人听不懂我说英语，但是在我对于讲普通话的，特别是他的普通话特别好的人，我就非常紧张，就像现在。那么这样一个问题，它实际上就涉及到了一个表征的问题，因为这个 语言的一种经验，它不是一蹴而就的，它是一个长期的经验过程，这个长期的一个表征的建构过程。那么我们回想一下，当我经常会去回想，在我上小学的时候，我是用方言教学，那实际上老师他说的说是普通话，但实际上这种普通话，就是把方言和普通话揉在一起的普通话。比如说，我的语文老师，中学的语文老师，第一节课他是这么说的，他要求我们说普通话，他说：“你们上英文课讲国语不像话。”你们听得懂我说什么吗？这是中文老师在语文课上面说的。他说：“你们上中文课不讲国语不像话。”所以他自己讲的中文没有一句是标准的中文。我就是在这样的一个环境之下长大。那么我在我的表征系统里头先建构了方言，然后又建构起了一个不标准的混杂式的普通话的方言，方言和普通话混杂的一种语言，然后自己又后来学习，向标准的普通话靠近的那种普通话，接下来20几岁又开始学英语，所以反省我的这个学习过程，我就想到了很多的问题，这就是我为什么一直在研究表征问题。那么我们先来看一看表征这个它是一个什么东西。通常来说，我们的表征指的就是抽象的意义，就是昨天吕于明教授说的世界知识或者百科知识这样一种抽象的形式。那么还有呢，就是我们最早学的是语音，然后我们学了字形。好了，那么对于我来说，以及像我这样的人来说，就很复杂了。我的语音表征实际上既有方言的表征，既有好像普通话的那种普通话的表征，还有最靠近普通话的表征。那么这些表征都和统一的一个形式联系在一起。那么当我要通达这个语义表征的时候，我的刚才说的3种形式的语音就会发生冲突。这样一种冲突，它必然导致混乱。就像我的一个同事，他经常一生气的时候，他的普通话就，他福州人，他普通话就说的满口的福州腔。如果他很注意的时候，他的普通话也是很不错的。比如说，他说叫你晃好不晃好，现在又在那边晃什么晃？ 浪费时间。好，你们听懂了我说什么吗？他说叫你们放好不放好，现在又在那边翻什么翻，浪费时间。那么这里头这样的例子在南方是很多的，有很多的人像我一样，当他面对着一个正规场合的时候，他会很注意，他的注意力要非常的集中，他才能够讲好他的普通话。好，这就涉及到了一个昨天的话题，昨天杨晶教授说的双语大脑，还有崔刚教授说的双语自行控制能力问题。那么像我们这样一种双语者或者多语者，我们需要有很多的注意资源，比你们这些普通话说的很标准的人来说，或者和我自己30年前我没有意识到我的普通话根本不是普通话的时候，我所要付出的注意资源，那就非常的不一样。所以呢，我们来看一下表征以及它的定义是什么。表征实际上就是我们关于世界意义的一种抽象的存在，它是一个抽象系统。我们把它叫做，如果它跟语言有关的，可以有语言表达的这个部分，我们把它叫做语义表征。那么这种表征，它的本质特征是对具体知识的抽象和存储。那么这种抽象和存储，它是需要通过记忆来实现的。那么记忆它又是通过注意，注意它是一种心理能量，它在知觉和情绪或者外围因素的作用下，对认知对象发生聚焦，并且影响记忆的效率。好，请大家记住，注意在我们的语言加工当中，它是非常重要的。这就想说的，昨天崔刚教授也说了，关于这个认知控制问题。实际上，认知控制它就是一种注意资源的调动能力。那么下面我们会讲到我们的研究。那么讲表征，我们当然是讲的语言表征。昨天李一鸣教授说的那种，所谓的灵与肉啊，什么世界知识、百科知识啊，只要他能够用语言表达的，我们都可以把它叫做语义。好，那么语义，我们要理解这个世界，我们讲话要让别人理解，我们要说出人家听得懂的话，我们就需要一个所谓的语义加工过程。语义加工过程它由2个部分组成，一个部分是符号的系统，一个是语义系统，2个系统的交互作用。那么我刚才说的问题，实际上大部分存在于符号系统，就是这个层面的问题。 好，那这是我们设计了一个简单的这个示例图。我们的表征啊，实际上是这样一个像三角形一样的东西。越往上，它的抽象水平就越高；越往下，它的抽象水平就越低。那么它分别有记忆和注意。记忆它可以对外在事物的记忆和输入，也可以把表征系统的知识重新提取出来，进行短时间的记忆。那么这个过程它需要意识的参与。那么意识要参与，它必须有注意来驱动所以注意是非常重要的。要语言输出，要听懂别人的话都必须这些因素都必须同时出现。那么请大家注意，就是我们的语义架构，它是从最底层的符号的输入，到更上层的词语句，到语义，就是我们说的命题，一个一个，然后不断整合，不断整合，到最高层，它的抽象水平越高。好了，那我们来看刚才我说的情形，就是我自己为什么在讲普通话的时候，特别是对那些普通话讲得很好的人的时候，我非常紧张，我需要调起大量的注意资源。为什么呢？刚才我已经说了，我在这个最低层面，就是语音表征的层面它实际上已经有3重的表征。那么昨天杨俊教授也说过了，只要我们学任何东西，它都会让我们的神经系统发生变化。那这个问题呢，李平教授 Pennsylvania University 的这个李平教授，他在2014年做过一篇长篇的综述，他也反复的强调了，就是双语对于人的神经系统的改变，它叫plasticity 就是对神经的塑造这样的一个过程。好了，那像我这样的学了方言，又学了是方言、非方言，是普通话、非普通话的语音系统，又学了所谓的普通话，那么我的语音，我的神经网络系统，也就是我的这个突触的连接，它和一般人是不一样的。那这种不一样在于说，这种连接它的稳定性可能是比较差的，或者说，这样一个系统它的通达效率是比较低的，或者说，当我要准确通达的时候，我要调起大量的注意资源。好，那我们来看，当一个人学了方言，又学了普通话，即便他学的是标准的普通话，那么我们来看他们之间不可能是独立的存在， 都是连接起来的。比如说我们学普通话的时候，可能用我们的方言来作为参照开始学习，而我们学英语的时候，我们可能可能用普通话来做参照。接下来不管你学了多少语言，你必须有前面的语言作为参照。据说雅各布森就是结构主义的代表人物啊，学了12种的欧洲语言，所以人家说他说他是语言天才，但是实际上是在讽刺他。怎么说的呢？他说 He can speak 12 European languages in Russian， 就是他可以说12种语言，但说的都像俄语。好了，那我们想象一下，为什么会这样呢？因为在它的表征系统里头，它的每一个节点之间，它的作用变得极其的复杂，这需要它大量的注意来参与，来表达它的这个语义。你看，那么这样一个问题引起了我们这个团队的重视，因为我们福建这边它很多方言，每个方言和另一个方言之间呢，都无法交流的，它的语音系统完全不一样，所以我们做了大量的对于方言普通话双语者，对于方言普通话英语的所谓的3语者这样的研究。那么还有一个问题，我们也值得注意，就是昨天李一鸣教授反复提到的一种现象。就是说祖辈的语言，大家会说今天的学校老师的普通话都非常好了，不可能出现我刚才所描述的那种情形。的确，今天的情况好了很多，跟我们小时候的那种学习环境完全不可同日而语。然而，现在很多孩子他的语言教育是受到了他们祖辈的影响，他们的祖辈普通话就根本不是标准的普通话，那么这在他们的表征系统里头一定会产生印记，会产生影响。好，
李老师还有5分钟。
那么我们的研究结果是什么呢？根据这样的一个问题，我们的研究发现，首先会讲方言的人，他的语音意识和阅读能力比只会讲普通话的人要差，这是第一个我们的研究结论。我们做了5、6年的研究。第二个，我们用 ERP 来做，就是会讲方言又会讲普通话又会讲英语的人，他的 N2P3 的成分波幅要比只会讲普通话和英语这样的人要大。那么这说明什么呢？这说明方言的贝斯在加工语言的时候要付出更大的心理能量，那么去完成它的执行控制， 也就是说去缩短它的这个所谓的潜伏期，潜伏期是更短的 ，N2P3 的潜伏期是更短的。那换句话说，普通话方言或者多语者的自行控制优势是以巨大的注意力的付出作为代偿的，这就是所谓更为优势的自行功能。那么，我的结论就是，如果我们要让我们真正成为一个就是具有双语优势的这种人，就是在自行控制方面具有控制优势的人，我们的唯一方法就是提高我们对于各种语言的使用频率，以至于使得我们的加工付出更小的注意，也就付出更小的心理能量。那么这样一个问题就是这样一种自行控制能力能否让我们缩短进入老年痴呆的年龄，这是一个值得我们继续研究的问题。谢谢大家。我的发言完了。
Thank you, Professor Lee. It's good timing. So I think Professor Lee just now give us a very clear definition on language presentation and lexical access. And also he gave us an overview on the evidence from dialect Mandarin bilinguals, Chinese language bilinguals, and dialect Mandarin English trilinguals, and draw some interesting conclusions on language bilingual lexical presentations and access. And because time is limited, we have no time for questions. And now I think we go to the next part, the closing ceremony. So ladies and gentlemen, representatives from all over the world, the third International Symposium on Science, Language Science in the Era of Artificial Intelligence, organized by the School of Foreign Studies and the Center for the Advancement of Language Sciences, USTB, will soon concluded. Hereby we first welcome Professor Li Longbao, and he is also deputy chair of the Chinese Association of Psycholinguistics to make closing remarks. Please, Professor Li.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to give this closing speech on behalf of organizing committee or conference. First of all, my congratulations on the successful conclusion of the third International Symposium on Language Science in the Era of Artificial Intelligence. With an active academic exchange among the participants on the hot issues of language science, we have harvested a lot from all the researches presented in the past 1.5 days. Ours is a successful conference. Our special thanks should be extended to all the keynote speakers from home and abroad. Their interesting topics cover a variety of topics, including language acquisition, language processing, the diagnosis and intervention of language disorder, second language learning and development, and their researches were conducted with the application of different new paradigms, typically that of AI. These approaches will inspire our creativity in the future researches. Our thanks should also be given to all the participants of online and offline. The wonderful reports of the participants witnessed great progress in the study of language with the use of new techniques to probe into the field of psychology, psycholinguistics, neurolinguistics, artificial intelligence, and cognitive linguistics, and so on. So, researchers have extended the dimensions of language study and brought us to a better understanding of how language makes up human mind. The conference also witnesses the advantage of cooperation in the study of language. Many research fundings came from international or cross-institute teamwork. Academic cooperation makes interdisciplinary researches possible and sustainable. We are in a time of artificial intelligence. Never before have we so urgent a need to explore the structure of human mind so that we can match artificial intelligence with human cognitive systems. We believe that to serve the mystery of language is one of the most important ways out. To get into the mystery of unknown is just what we want to do and what should we do. In conclusion, let's express mountains of our thanks to the sponsors and co-sponsors and all the people who have volunteered their services for the conference. School of Foreign Languages, USTB, should be typically mentioned. It is their enthusiastic efforts that make the conference so successful. They have done a very, very good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee. That is a very fantastic and a very pertinent comments on us. And thank you for your good words. And now we welcome the closing speech made by Professor Sheng Wei. He is also Secretary of the Party Committee at School of Foreign Studies, USTB. Professor Sheng, please.
尊敬的各位专家、老师们、同学们，大家上午好。
Dear experts, teachers and students, good morning.
在过去的1天半里，我们通过线上线下相结合的方式，举办了第3届人工智能时代的语言科学国际会议。此刻，全部日程已经顺利结束，会议取得了圆满成功。
For the past 1.5 days, through a hybrid online and offline model, we have been organizing the 3rd International Symposium on Language Science in the Era of Artificial Intelligence.